The Rize Blade 2 has been out for a year and a half now, and it has been an epic adventure for sure, but not without its flaws. I've been shredding this bike for over 4,000 hard kilometers now, so I have learned a little bit about it. I absolutely love this bike, and I have many fond memories of my adventures going to places I thought I would never see, and this bike has made it all possible. The Blade 2 is great for sure, but there are a few issues that we will talk about here today. So grab some popcorn, kick your feet up, elbow drop that subscribe button, and let's talk about all things Rize Blade 2. Okay, let's talk about the batteries, which I actually absolutely love on this bike. The bike comes with a 52 volt 15 amp hour battery, which is actually a little small. You're only good for about maybe 50 to 60 kilometers if you like to pedal. But the dual battery, once you get that second battery on there, in my last videos you've seen that I've gone over 100 kilometers on one ride and it was cold out. The dual batteries are definitely the way to go. I wear out far before the battery ever does. They have been fantastic if you leave them locked on your bike while you're riding. They add quite a bit of weight to the bike, but that's what the motor's for, so you don't have to deal with the weight. If you like riding a lot, I'd highly recommend the dual or having a second charger there. You can charge both batteries up in 3 or 4 hours and it gets you out riding faster. Now, I get a lot of questions about running the batteries in parallel or in series, and which way would be best. My personal thoughts on that is I like to run them in parallel with the idea that the batteries will drain at the same time, and they will have an equal lifespan and will save power factor. I believe if you run the batteries in parallel, the batteries will age the same way. If you're running the batteries in series, it definitely works that way. All you got to do is leave this switch flipped off on the second battery, run your first battery till you're no lower than 20%. Then you turn your bike around, flip the switch on, and then you'll have enough juice to get back home. It definitely works that way. You'll still get probably over 100 kilometers in range, but sometimes you don't use that second battery because 40 kilometers or 50 kilometers is enough for a bike ride. So you'll find that you're leaving that second battery fully charged all the time, which is not that great for the battery. You should be draining them periodically. You don't ever want to leave the batteries fully charged. And that's why I like to run the batteries in parallel. Just so they drain equally. They're always getting discharged and recharged at the same rates. And I believe that'll prolong their life. But I'm sure somebody's going to correct me and I'm wrong about something, but this is my personal opinion, so that's the way it goes. The battery meters on these bikes don't work like you think they would work. So at 40 kilometers, we're still at 100%. That's pretty good. All right, guys, we just rolled past 60 kilometers. Battery says 84. It's about 83, 84 for the last little bit. But you can start to see it's dropping quite a bit faster than it was. So, yeah, 60 kilometers. That's insane. It's just something you have to be aware of. It doesn't mean that anything's broken. So because the voltage meter isn't 100% accurate, when it says it's about 90%, that's when I consider the battery to be about 50% depleted. And that's when I will start heading home if I'm really far out. And that way I can be sure I'll get home with about 20% left on the battery. Enough that if I need a little more juice, then it's still there. But 90% is kind of the new 50% on these bikes. Just be aware of that, or you're going to be pedaling. When the batteries are freshly charged, the bike will go 49 kilometers per hour while pedaling. And actually, if you're just using the throttle as well, pedaling doesn't really add too much. I wish the bike would go over 50 kilometers per hour, or actually closer to like 55 kilometers an hour to keep up with traffic. That would be really handy. It seems slightly too slow to be riding on the roads. I'd like it just to go a touch faster. I find the brakes work very well for the most part on these bikes. They're very responsive to one-finger control. I have no issues with that. One issue though is if you need to heavy brake, come to a hard stop, or if you're going down a very steep hill, the brakes are a little lacking, at least at my body weight and all the camera gear I'm carrying with me. Freaking studio on my back. But anyways, it's the brakes are a little lacking. If you really need to, in an emergency situation, you should practice it. Practice nailing the brakes just so you know what they feel like. They feel very responsive up until that emergency part, and you want them to stop a little bit faster then. So just keep that in mind. Maybe some better brake shoes on my part might do a little better. As for comfort on the Blade 2, I actually quite like the seat. That's coming from the OG Blade, because that seat sucked. And sitting on that thing, it looks soft and comfy, but you feel the plastic frame inside the seat. It's only about an inch, or probably like 3/4 of an inch of foam, and then you're sitting on some plastic, so it was pretty terrible. Because I don't feel that on the Blade 2. I'm probably comfortable for about 2 hours, and then my hiney starts getting a little sore. Oh my god. Okay, I'm pretty sore here. Seat's not overly comfortable for these long rides. Oh. It's mostly because you're pedaling and you're jostling back and forth, and literally if you're sitting in any seat jostling back and forth, it's going to get uncomfortable. So I think that Rize Bikes has done a great job on planning the seat, because I get a lot more sore from the OG Blade and especially my mountain bike. Now let's talk about the flaws. The motors are too powerful for the frames of these bikes. Some people have experienced the hub ends up spinning inside of the frame, and when that happens, it actually spins the cable around the axle and tears the wires and makes your motor completely useless, and it has to get replaced. Now that's a catastrophic failure. You do not want that happening. But all you got to do to rectify this issue is email Rize, if you haven't done so already. Most of us have, and they will send you some torque arms that you got to install on your bike. They're fairly easy, they're somewhat easy to install, and they will help save your motor from spinning inside of the frame, which, like I said, you do not want to happen. Hopefully the bikes are sent out this way now, but it's something that's happened to a few of us, as you can see in the pictures. I've been lucky, but some not so much. So just be aware of that there is a fix, but you got to be on top of it. So now it's time to talk about the overheating issue that some of these bikes have. For us that live in the hilly and mountainous areas, the Blade 2 climbs great if they're short runs, but if you're pushing the bike hard and the hill is a bit steeper, it has some overheating protection built into the bike, which is actually a good thing, so we don't have to worry about replacing motors and controllers as much. But it is ultra annoying. If you're on a long steep hill, that motor cuts out right at the wrong time every time. I know it's for the bike's protection, which is actually a good thing. It's something you just got to keep in mind that happens with these bikes. If the hill is long and steep, the bike will shut off to protect itself, and then you have to power the bike down and restart it, and it should clear. But if you keep going up the hill, it's just going to overheat in another minute anyways. Rize Blade 1 made it up this on street tires. This is way worse. overheated in fucking walk mode. I'm gonna have to go back through some old footage and see if the OG climbed that, because I'm sure it did. This thing wasn't even close. There was a lot of motors and controllers replaced with the OG blades, so this is to help protect us as customers. I hope the Blade 3 has a higher tolerance, get us up a few steeper hills. We'll see. I hope you're listening, Rize. I'm no expert on suspension, but I can just tell what my thoughts are on it. The front suspension is actually pretty soft compared to the rear suspension. It handles the rocks and stuff, the rocks and bumps I put it through really well if I'm standing up. Sitting down, don't expect a cushy ride at all. It is just made to take the spike out of any kind of bump that you hit, but it'll still rock your spine if you're not careful. When I was riding through Winnipeg, I was literally just riding down their roads, seated most of the time because I was trying to pedal really fast. And the thing I remember most about that is how much my spine was hurting. While I was riding from that road, and that's with rear suspension. I couldn't imagine on the OG blade. I'd probably be about a foot shorter if that were the case. So the suspension helps, it takes the spike out of it, but it does not make it a cushy ride. The bike is more for standing up and using your legs for suspension out in the bush. It's great for that, actually. Okay, another thing about the Blade 2 is it is a beautiful bike. I think you all agree. One problem that come with a beautiful bike is that thieves also think that it's beautiful. You cannot leave this bike locked up anywhere. If you're thinking on riding this bike to work or to school or anywhere and it's going to be out of your sight, you will not own this bike for very long. These kind of bikes, if a thief sees them locked up on the side of the road somewhere, and it doesn't matter if there's people around, they're very brazen. They will cut through your lock no matter what you got, and they will own your Rize Blade 2. Can I ask you for a favor? Yeah. I really have to go to the washroom, but I need to leave my bike somewhere, and I don't have a bike lock.
It's expensive.
Yeah, it is. That's why I don't want to leave it. Thank you very much for this, guys.
No problem.
Thank you. Yes, thank you guys very, very much. I'm a big fan of your 2x4s. Thank you.
That's really good job.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's why I don't want to leave it outside, because a lot of people think it looks really good.
All right, have a good evening.
Yeah, thanks again. Some of the changes I'd like to see for the Blade 3. I don't think that the first gear on this bike, or your easy gear, is easy enough. When you need to go slow and you're doing some steep climbs, I'd like to see a much easier first gear. Maybe if Rize could provide like a 9-speed bike and get a lower first gear on here, that would be fantastic. I'd really like to see that. High gear seems to be decent. When you're doing 49 kilometers an hour, you're pedaling quite quick, but I can keep up with it. When Rize finally gets the bike up to 55 kilometers per hour, I hope, one day, might need a little bit of a higher gear to keep up with the bike. So a 9-speed should do it. A lower first gear and a higher fast gear. That's what I'd like to see for that. As I talked about earlier, I'd like to see some better brakes. And a higher top speed. I'd like to see some better suspension on the bike. These bikes are upgradable, so that's not ever a deal breaker, but I'd like to see it so it's the rear suspension would have a little more travel in it. Make it a little nicer for off-roading. Definitely, I'd like the bike not to overheat so easily. It is incredibly frustrating. It is probably my single biggest complaint about the bike. It's not a flaw issue with the bike, it's just, it's a little overprotective. So remember, don't get it twisted. This bike is amazing. Despite its few issues, I'm out there exploring the world and having a blast doing it. What's more is that this bike is fully upgradable with aftermarket parts to get it dialed into your riding needs. So please consider subscribing to the channel and let me know what you'd like to see or discuss. I'll always do my best to answer all your questions. See you guys out there.